The DNA report trembled in Kang Jae-won's hands like it had a pulse of its own. 2 matches. 99.99%. He read the names once, then again, as if the ink might rearrange itself into something less impossible. His throat went tight, not from fear. Fear was a language his body had forgotten, but from something far more dangerous: hope. Across the quiet morning light of the small restaurant in Gangnam, the waitress who had poured his coffee every day for 3 years moved between tables with the same calm, careful steps. She set bowls down, refilled water, accepted payments with a neutral face. She never stared. She never flinched. Jae-won looked up from the report and stared at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. Amara. The name struck him like a blade under the ribs, sharp and buried deep. His blood went cold. And then the story. How a man who ruled Gangnam from a high-rise ended up shaking over a DNA report in a modest restaurant, pulled itself backward, for years and a lifetime ago, to the first crack in a secret that should never have survived this long. If the opening twist already has your heart racing, this is the moment people usually forget to do, the simple thing that keeps stories like this alive. Tap like, subscribe, and share for Afro-K ruthless love stories, because what happens next only gets more ruthless. And the comments section is where the real theories start. Jae-won was 34 and had a reputation that made even confident men lower their eyes. In Gangnam, money talked, fear sang, and Kang Jae-won conducted both like a maestro. He ran an empire from above the city, from glass walls that looked down on Seoul's flickering veins of traffic and neon, from offices where the air itself seemed too afraid to move. In his world, loyalty was purchased, tested, and punished. Rivals did not say his name out loud in public. They did not joke about him. Men who had survived blood feuds still went quiet when his shadow crossed a doorway. He was cold because warmth made people careless. He was calculating because hesitation got people buried. His men bowed when he entered, not because he demanded it, but because their bodies remembered what happened to those who forgot respect. And yet, every morning, no matter how long the night had been, no matter what kind of phone calls had dragged him into violence or negotiation or both, Jae-won ate breakfast at the same small restaurant tucked between newer buildings like it had refused to make room for the future. It was clean. It was quiet. It was ordinary. It was the one place nobody bothered him. His security team hated it. They would rather lock down an entire hotel floor than let their boss sit in a place where anyone could walk in. But Jae-won's word was final. No entourage. No show. A single car outside. A man at a distance. A quiet watch. Inside, Jae-won sat at the same table with his back to the wall, his eyes scanning reflections in windows and the slight movement of hands. The staff had learned quickly. No chatter, no trembling apologies, no attention. Serve him like he was any other man, and he would continue to let their little restaurant exist in peace. That morning routine, his only predictable habit, was the closest thing he allowed to comfort. It was also where his one weakness returned every day, uninvited and sharp. A woman who had vanished 4 years ago. A woman nobody asked about. A woman his men had tried to find and failed. A woman Jae-won had stopped talking about, not because he had stopped thinking about her, but because speaking her name made him remember that there were things even he could not control. Her face had stayed in the corners of his mind like a song he couldn't stop hearing. The curve of her smile before she learned who he really was. The way she had looked at him with a mixture of challenge and curiosity. The way she had whispered his name like it belonged to her. He had not seen her since she disappeared. And so he came here, day after day, to a restaurant where nobody asked questions, where he could pretend that the world still had ordinary corners untouched by his power, where he could drink coffee poured by a woman who, for 3 years, never once let her hand shake. Amara was 29, black, American, and the kind of quiet that made people underestimate her. She worked the morning shift at the restaurant in Gangnam because mornings were safe. In the daytime, danger hid behind manners. At night, it came out to breathe. She wore her hair pulled back, her uniform clean, her face composed in a way that made her seem almost distant. Customers rarely remembered her features, only that she was efficient and polite. She blended into the hum of the place like background music. But she wasn't background. She was hiding in plain sight. Above the restaurant, in a tiny apartment that always smelled faintly of warm laundry and children's shampoo, She was raising twin boys alone. Minjun and Theo were 3 years old and had the kind of energy that made small rooms feel smaller. They were opposites in motion but identical in the most terrifying detail: their eyes. Sharp, deep-set, observant. Eyes that had no business being in the face of Black American toddlers in Korea. Eyes that belonged to their father. Every morning, Amara served coffee to Kang Jae-won as if her life depended on it. Because it did. She knew exactly who he was. Seoul knew. She had known since the first week she took the job and recognized him. Not from the media. Men like him didn't live on ordinary news, but from whispers that moved through neighborhoods like smoke. The kind of whispers that always ended with someone glancing over their shoulder. She had decided in that first week to quit. Then she had looked at the rent bill, the preschool deposit, the grocery receipts, the plane ticket savings that never quite got big enough, and she had stayed. She kept her head down. She kept her expression neutral. She kept her hands steady. She convinced herself that if she behaved like a stranger long enough, she would become one. It almost worked. For 3 years, she lived with the daily torture of being within 20 feet of the man who could ruin her just by remembering her. And every day, she wondered if today would be the day he looked up and saw the truth written on her face. The truth had started 4 years ago, when she was still an exchange student, and Seoul still felt like a city that might accept her if she tried hard enough. Back then, she had met Jae-won in a jazz bar, the kind with low lighting and a stage small enough that the singer's breath could be seen when she leaned into the microphone. Amara had gone there alone after a difficult week, wanting music and the comfort of being anonymous in a crowd. She was tired of being stared at, tired of being asked where she was really from, tired of having to be twice as polite to receive half as much respect. She had taken a seat at the bar and ordered something she barely knew how to pronounce. And then a man had sat 2 stools away and smiled like the world wasn't heavy. He hadn't approached her like she was exotic. He hadn't asked ignorant questions. He hadn't performed his interest like a show. He had simply looked at her as if she was a person worth meeting. They talked. He told her his name was Jae-won. He said he worked in business. He laughed quietly at her jokes. He listened when she spoke. When she left, he walked her outside, keeping a careful distance as if he knew the kind of fear women carried and didn't want to trigger it. At the corner, he asked if he could see her again. Amara said yes, because for the first time in weeks, she felt seen in a way that didn't make her feel like a spectacle. Their relationship moved fast, fueled by the intensity of 2 people who both carried secrets in their pockets. Jae-won took her to places tourists didn't know existed. Late-night noodle shops that stayed open for the city's hidden workers, tiny bookstores that smelled like paper and dust, rooftop views where the wind tasted like the Han River. He was affectionate in private, careful in public. He didn't post pictures. He didn't introduce her to friends. He didn't let her meet his family. At first, Amara thought it was cultural caution. Then she started noticing other things. Men who bowed slightly when Jae-won entered certain rooms. Cars that appeared behind them too often. Conversations that stopped when he approached. A hardness in him that sometimes slipped into his voice when the phone rang. One night, she followed him. Only a little, after he abruptly left their dinner with an apology too calm to be real. She watched from across the street as he stepped into an alley with 2 men. There was no shouting, no drama, just a quiet exchange that ended with one of the men stumbling backward like he had been hit. Except Jae-won's hands were clean. The truth landed on her in pieces. This man was not simply business. He was power. He was danger. She confronted him the next day, her heart pounding, her voice steady only because fear had taught her how to perform calm. He didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. He looked at her for a long time and said, quietly, "If you stay with me, you will never be able to pretend your life is normal again." Amara should have left then, but she didn't. Because love is not always gentle. Sometimes it's a chain wrapped in silk. She stayed until the day his world finally reached into hers with a hand she couldn't ignore. It wasn't Jae-won who came for her. It was his mother. The meeting happened in a private room of an expensive tea house, the kind that greeted wealth with silent bows and served bitterness in porcelain cups. Amara arrived thinking it would be an awkward introduction. She found a woman who looked at her like an error that needed correcting. Kang Jae-won's mother was elegant in the way old money could afford to be. Her hanbok-inspired jacket was tailored perfectly, her makeup subtle, her smile polite enough to pass for kindness if you didn't listen closely. "You are not Korean," she said after the smallest pleasantries, her tone as calm as the tea. Amara's spine stiffened. "No, I'm not. You will never be part of this family." Amara swallowed. "I'm not asking to be." The mother raised one finger slightly, the gesture quiet but absolute. "You will leave," she continued, "or I will make you disappear." It wasn't said like a threat made in anger. It was said like a fact. Amara went cold all over. She left the tea house with her hands shaking, not because she wanted to, but because the woman's eyes had held the kind of certainty that came from knowing men who made problems vanish. That night, Amara didn't tell Jae-won. She didn't know how. She didn't know if he would believe her, or if he would insist she stay, and then his mother would prove her point with violence. She packed her suitcase before dawn and left Korea. She told herself she was choosing safety. She told herself she could breathe again. 2 weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. Twin boys. She sat on the bathroom floor in her small apartment back in America, the test strip in her hand, her mind spinning. Her first instinct was to call him. Her second was to remember his mother's voice. "Leave, or I will make you disappear." Amara imagined calling Jae-won, imagined him raging at his mother, imagined the war it would create inside a family built on reputation. She imagined herself as the spark that started a fire that would burn everyone around her, including her unborn children. So she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She said nothing. She disappeared, and she built a life out of whatever pieces she could carry. By the time the twins were born, she had become a machine of survival. Work, diapers, night feedings, doctor visits, exhaustion. Minjun was quiet and observant, the kind of child who watched before he moved. Theo was fearless, a little storm in pajamas who laughed too loudly and demanded hugs like the world owed him comfort. They grew fast, and as they grew, their eyes sharpened into something that didn't belong in their environment. Amara learned to avoid bright lighting when taking pictures. She learned to angle their faces away from strangers. She learned to smile when people commented on their unique look, and then she learned to leave quickly. Eventually, money forced her into a decision she had sworn she would never make. She had to go back to Korea, not because she wanted to, because the kind of work that could support her and the twins without breaking her body existed more easily there for someone with her language skills. Because a friend offered her a lead. Because she told herself Seoul was big, and the Mafia boss of Gangnam would never notice one waitress among millions. She returned 3 years ago under a different name. She found a cheap apartment. She found a job. And then she found herself in the one restaurant she should have avoided. On her first day, she saw him at the corner table, calm and dangerous and familiar. Her lungs forgot how to breathe. He didn't look up long enough to recognize her. Amara forced her feet to move. She forced her face to stay neutral. She poured his coffee with a steady hand. He said, without looking at her, "Thank you." His voice hit her like memory. And she survived that day. Then the next. And then 3 years passed, and she began to believe the lie that the past could stay buried. It started to unravel on a morning when her babysitter canceled. Amara stared at the message on her phone with a panic that tasted metallic. The restaurant opened in 40 minutes. She had already used too many favors with neighbors. The twins' preschool started later. She had no one. Minjun stood beside the couch holding a toy car, watching her with those sharp eyes that seemed too old for 3. Theo bounced on the balls of his feet, chewing on the sleeve of his pajama shirt. "Mommy," Theo said, in the small voice he used when he wanted to be brave, "we go with you?" Amara hesitated. She had never brought them to work. She had never let them exist in the same space as Jae-won. But she had no choice. So she dressed them quickly, pulled caps low over their heads, and walked them down the narrow stairs to the back entrance of the restaurant. She tucked them into the kitchen area with crayons, paper, and strict instructions to stay quiet. The cooks cooed over them briefly, and then got busy. The restaurant began to fill. Amara moved through her shift like her body was operating on borrowed time. And then Seo-jun walked into the back kitchen. Seo-jun was Jae-won's right-hand man, the kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to make a room obey. He wore his suits like armor and carried himself with the ease of a man who had done terrible things and slept anyway. He wasn't supposed to be in the kitchen. He usually waited outside or in a separate corner, watching. But that morning he came in to retrieve something. An order Jae-won wanted delivered elsewhere, or perhaps simply to check the back exit like he always did. He stepped in, and his gaze swept the room the way trained eyes did. Inventory, exits, hands, faces. Then he saw them. Two small boys sitting on the floor with crayons. He froze so completely that even the cooks noticed. Minjun looked up first, and the kitchen seemed to tilt. Those eyes. Seo-jun had seen those eyes in every room that mattered in Gangnam. He had seen them in mirrors behind Jae-won's shoulder, in the reflection of office windows, in the calm gaze that preceded violence. Deep-set, sharp, unforgiving, even in a child. Minjun blinked slowly, watching Seo-jun with quiet curiosity. Theo, oblivious, grinned and waved his crayon like a greeting flag. Seo-jun didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply stared until Amara, sensing something wrong, turned and followed his gaze. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Seo-jun's eyes shifted to her face. Not with surprise. With recognition. Amara's hands went numb. Seo-jun gave the slightest nod, almost polite, almost nothing, and walked out of the kitchen like he hadn't just seen a secret that could detonate an empire. But from that moment on, he watched Amara differently. If that kitchen moment made you gasp, lock in right here, because this is where secrets start behaving like live wires. And if you're enjoying the tension, do a quick favor for Afro-K Ruthless love stories. Hit subscribe, tap like, and drop a comment with your first instinct. Should Seo-jun tell Jae-won immediately, or protect the children by keeping quiet? The story gets darker either way. Seo-jun did not confront Amara. He did not ask questions. He did what he always did. He collected information like ammunition. That afternoon, he requested the restaurant's employee records with a tone that did not invite refusal. The manager, sweating, handed them over. Seo-jun scanned Amara's file and felt a cold certainty settle into his bones. The name was wrong. The identification number didn't align cleanly with the paperwork he could access. It was good work, careful, deliberate, but it was not perfect. People who ran were rarely perfect forever. He ran a background check, then another. Then he cross-referenced old immigration and student records the way only someone with connections could. A face appeared on an older document, one with a different haircut and younger eyes. Amara. Real name. Real history. And an old note attached to a file that had once been sealed with power. Missing. Seo-jun's mouth went dry. So she hadn't vanished into nothing. She had been here the whole time. The woman Jae-won never stopped searching for had been pouring his coffee every morning while he sat 10 feet away, blind to the truth because he never expected fate to be that cruel. Seo-jun leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He knew his boss's temper. He knew what Jae-won looked like when betrayed. He also knew what Jae-won looked like when wounded. This was both. If Seo-jun walked into the office and said, "She's here, and she has children," it could end in blood. Not necessarily hers. Seo-jun didn't believe Jae-won would hurt Amara once he knew, but blood still. Blood in the air. Blood on family ties. Blood on anyone who had hidden this. But Seo-jun needed proof. Not because he doubted what he had seen in the twins' eyes. Because proof was what controlled chaos. So he waited. A few days later, the opportunity came quietly. The twins drank from paper cups in the kitchen, spilling a little, laughing. Seo-jun had one of the kitchen staff dispose of the cups, and then retrieve them before they reached the trash. He handled them carefully, like evidence. Then he waited for Jae-won to leave a glass behind at his table, as he often did when the waitress cleared too quickly. Seo-jun collected it as well. He sent both for testing using a private lab that asked no questions when paid enough. And then he watched Amara. Amara felt the shift before she understood it. A woman who had survived long enough to raise twins alone learned to read danger the way other people read weather. She noticed when someone's gaze lingered too long. She noticed when footsteps paused behind her. Seo-jun began appearing more often. Not in her way, not threatening, but present. He watched her hands when she poured coffee. He watched her face when Jae-won entered. He watched the back kitchen door like he expected her to run. Amara's nights became restless. She began packing in small ways. Not suitcases, too obvious, but gathering documents, counting cash, checking flights. She told herself she would leave in 1 month. 1 month, and then she would be gone again, this time for good. But the twins were settled. Minjun had just started preschool and had finally stopped clinging to her leg at drop-off. Theo had begun sleeping through the night, his nightmares fading as if his small body had decided it was safe to rest. Amara stood over them while they slept and felt a sick helplessness. How many times could she uproot them before it broke something in them? She sat on the edge of her bed that night, looking down at their faces. In the dim light, their eyes were closed, their lashes long against their cheeks, their mouths slightly open in the soft surrender of sleep. She whispered, so quietly that the walls barely heard, "Your father is a dangerous man." Her throat tightened. "And he's sitting 20 feet away from you every morning." The next day, the phone call came. Seo-jun answered with a calm voice, but his hand tightened around the device. The lab technician spoke professionally, as if the results were ordinary. They were not. 2 matches. 99.99% paternity. Twins. Seo-jun thanked the technician, ended the call, and sat still for a long moment, as if movement would shatter something fragile in the air. Then he printed the report. Paper made things real. He walked into Jae-won's office in the high-rise where glass and steel tried to pretend they could replace morality. The men outside the door straightened. Nobody spoke. Seo-jun didn't announce himself. He simply entered, approached the desk, and placed the report down without a word. Jae-won looked at the paper with mild irritation, expecting an update on a rival or a shipment or a debt. Then he saw the numbers. 99.99%. 2 matches. His eyes narrowed. He read the names. He read them again. The room went silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Jae-won's jaw tightened slowly, muscle by muscle. He lifted his gaze to Seo-jun, and in that look there was no question about what it meant. Only one question that mattered. Where? Seo-jun's mouth was dry. She's been pouring your coffee for 3 years, boss. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Jae-won's face. Something raw, almost boyish, like shock had stripped him down to whatever he had been before power hardened him. Then it vanished. His voice came out low. Alone? Seo-jun nodded. Yes. Jae-won stared at the report again, as if the numbers might explain why the universe had chosen this cruelty. His hands did not shake. That would have been too human. But when he stood, the movement was so controlled it looked like violence contained. He did not call his guards. He did not call his driver. He took his coat, walked out, and left the building with the quiet authority of a man stepping into a battlefield. This is the point where most people think the story's biggest twist already happened. But trust this, the real emotional damage starts now. If you want more stories that hit like this, make sure you subscribe to Afro-K Ruthless Love Stories, hit like, and share it with someone who loves ruthless romance and dangerous secrets. Because what Jae-won does next is going to split opinions down the middle. The restaurant bell chimed softly when Jae-won entered. No entourage, no bodyguards, no Seo-jun at his shoulder. Just him. The staff went still in the way animals went still when a predator entered the clearing. Even customers who didn't know his name could feel the shift, an invisible pressure, a warning in the air. Jae-won's gaze swept the room once and landed on Amara like an arrow. Amara was carrying a tray of bowls. She saw him the moment he stepped inside. And she knew. Not because his face had changed, his face always looked like stone, but because his eyes were different. Focused. Locked. No longer indifferent. He knew. Her heart began to pound so hard she felt it in her fingertips. She didn't drop the tray. She didn't stumble. She simply moved as she always did, because survival had trained her to keep her body calm even when her soul screamed. Jae-won walked to his usual table and sat. He did not look around. He did not touch the menu. He waited. Amara approached with the coffee pot, her hand steady, her expression neutral. The distance between them felt like a tightrope. She poured. The coffee streamed into the cup with a soft sound. Jae-won watched her hands like he was memorizing them. Then he spoke softly, not as a Mafia boss, not as a ruler of Gangnam, but as a man who had been punched in the chest by time. Amara. Her name, in his voice, made her stomach twist. That is your real name, isn't it? Amara set the coffee pot down carefully. She did not deny it. She did not run. Yes, she said. The word hung between them. Jae-won's gaze hardened slightly, but there was pain under it, a crack in the stone. How long were you going to hide them from me? Amara's breath shuddered. She hated that her body wanted to react. She hated that she still remembered what it felt like to be held by him. As long as I had to, she said quietly. Your mother made it clear. I would disappear if I stayed. At the mention of his mother, something changed. Jae-won's eyes narrowed in a way that wasn't anger at Amara. It was anger redirected. She threatened you? Amara held his gaze. She promised me. Silence. The noise of the restaurant continued around them like the world didn't understand that something monumental had just cracked open. Jae-won's fingers tightened around his cup until his knuckles whitened. He hadn't known. Or he had chosen not to know. An equally damning possibility. His voice came out lower. Where are they? Amara swallowed. There was no winning choice. Every answer was a door that led deeper into danger. In the kitchen, she said. Jae-won stood. Customers flinched as his chair scraped the floor. The staff froze. Someone whispered his name like a prayer. Amara turned and led him toward the back, feeling as if she was walking toward an execution. Hers, or his, or perhaps all of theirs. The kitchen smelled like sesame oil and broth. The cooks moved slower, their eyes wide, pretending they didn't notice the most feared man in Gangnam stepping into their space. On the floor near the corner, Minjun and Theo sat with crayons. Minjun looked up first, and the world seemed to pause. Jae-won's gaze locked onto the child's face. The shape of the jaw, the set of the mouth, the eyes, those unmistakable eyes that had stared down grown men in boardrooms and alleyways. A child wearing them was like seeing his own ghost. Theo, on the other hand, looked up and grinned like the world was friendly. Then he stood and ran straight to Jae-won without hesitation. He wrapped his small arms around Jae-won's leg like it belonged to him. No fear, no uncertainty, like he had been waiting. Jae-won, who had ordered men to disappear with a word, who had watched violence like it was weather, went still. His throat worked like he was trying to swallow something too big. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to his knees. Theo leaned into him, warm and solid and real. Jae-won lifted a hand and touched Theo's cheek with the kind of gentleness that looked unnatural on him. Like tenderness was a foreign language his fingers were struggling to pronounce. Minjun didn't move. He simply watched, quiet, assessing, as if he was deciding whether this stranger deserved to exist in their small universe. Minjun held up a drawing. It was messy, colored too hard in some places, but it was clearly a person, a tall man in a suit. Broad shoulders, dark hair, a straight line for a mouth. Jae-won's stomach twisted. He pointed at the drawing, his voice rawer than it had been in years. Who's that? Minjun blinked, then answered in a small, serious voice. The man mommy looks at every morning. The sentence hit Jae-won like a confession and a curse. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Amara stood behind him, her hands clenched, her eyes burning. She had imagined this moment in nightmares, imagined Jae-won raging, imagined him taking the children, imagined him punishing her for years of silence. She had not imagined him breaking. But the crack was there. Jae-won bowed his head slightly, his forehead almost touching Theo's hair, as if he needed the contact to stay upright. And in that kitchen, with cooks pretending not to see and the air smelling like soup, the most feared man in Seoul finally looked like a father. If that moment hit you in the chest, this is where the audience usually floods the comments. Because some people will call Amara cruel for hiding the twins, and others will call her brave for surviving. If you're watching on Afro-K Ruthless Love Stories, tap like, subscribe, and comment whose side you're on right now, Amara's, Jae-won's, or the children's. And if you know someone who lives for dramatic, ruthless love stories, share this with them, because the next confrontation is pure fire. Jae-won did not touch Amara after that. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't try to pull her into some nostalgic embrace. He simply stood, slowly, as if sudden movement might scare the children away. Theo continued clinging to him like a little shadow. Minjun's gaze remained sharp. Jae-won looked at Amara, and in his eyes was something frightening because it wasn't anger. It was purpose. I'm going to handle my mother, he said. Amara's lips parted. Jae-won. He cut her off gently, which was almost more unsettling than cruelty. You should have told me. But she had no right. Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to say she had been afraid of him, too. Afraid of what his world would do to her. Afraid of what his love would demand. But the words wouldn't come. Jae-won knelt again, this time in front of Minjun. He held his hands open, palms visible, the universal gesture of, I won't hurt you. Minjun didn't flinch, but he didn't smile either. Jae-won's voice was very quiet. What's your name? Minjun hesitated. Minjun. Jae-won nodded, as if memorizing it. And him. Minjun glanced at Theo. Theo. Theo grinned at his brother like he was proud to be named. Jae-won swallowed. I'm Jae-won. He didn't say your father. Not yet. He didn't take that word as if it was something he could claim by force. Minjun stared at him for a long time, then looked away and returned to his drawing. It wasn't rejection. It was caution. And for a man like Jae-won, caution from a 3-year-old felt like judgment he couldn't bribe. That evening, Jae-won went to see his mother. He did not go as a son asking for understanding. He went as Kang Jae-won. His mother's home was quiet, protected, full of taste and expensive silence. The staff bowed deeply when he entered, then vanished as if the walls had swallowed them. His mother met him in a sitting room that smelled like polished wood and old money. Her smile appeared, practiced. Jae-won, it's unusual for you to come without warning. He didn't sit. His voice was calm, and that calm was the most terrifying part. You threatened Amara. His mother's expression didn't shift much. I protected our family. You made her leave. I corrected a mistake. Jae-won stepped forward 1 pace. The air seemed to tighten. You stole 4 years from me, he said, each word measured. You threatened the mother of my children. You made her disappear. For the first time, his mother's eyes flickered. My children, she repeated, as if tasting something bitter. Jae-won's gaze remained fixed on her. Twins. She recovered quickly, her chin lifting. If that is true, they still carry the family blood. But their mother. Stop. His voice cut through the room like a knife. His mother's lips tightened. You think you can bring a foreign woman into this family and expect no consequences? Reputation matters. Bloodlines matter. The family name matters. Jae-won leaned forward slightly, his eyes cold. My sons have my blood. That is the family name. His mother held his gaze, refusing to retreat. You're blinded by emotion. Jae-won's mouth curved into something that wasn't a smile. No, I'm seeing clearly. He straightened. If you ever come near them or their mother again, I will treat you the way I treat my enemies. Silence fell like a curtain. His mother's breath caught, small, controlled, but real. In that moment, she understood something she had forgotten. Her son was not only feared by the world. He was capable of turning that fear toward her. Jae-won turned to leave. His mother's voice followed him, thinner now. What will people say? He paused at the doorway, not looking back. I don't care, he said. And then he walked out, leaving her surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt like a cage. The days that followed did not become magically soft. There was no montage where pain dissolved into romance, and everyone smiled into sunlight. Reality was heavier than that. Jae-won did not force Amara into anything. He didn't move her into his penthouse. He didn't demand the children. He didn't punish her silence with possession. Instead, he asked. Not ordered. Asked. Can they know who I am? He said one morning, standing near the back door of the restaurant like a man trying to remember how to be human. Can I be there? Amara watched him carefully. She had seen him with blood on his hands, metaphorically, and close enough to literally that she had nightmares for months. She knew what he was capable of. She knew his world did not forgive weakness. But she also saw something else now. A man who looked at the twins like they were the only thing in the room that mattered. And that kind of love could be dangerous, too. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know what it means to let you in without letting your world in. Jae-won nodded as if he respected the complexity. Then let me prove it. He arranged security around the restaurant. Not close enough to scare customers, but close enough that danger would have to fight hard to reach them. He started arriving earlier for breakfast, before the rush, and instead of sitting in the main area like a king in exile, he quietly stepped into the kitchen area and sat on a crate like it was normal. The cooks pretended not to see. The staff pretended not to whisper. But Amara saw everything. She saw Jae-won building Lego towers with Minjun, patiently letting the child decide the shape, letting him knock it down and rebuild without correction. She saw Theo climb onto Jae-won's back like a tiny conqueror, while Jae-won pretended to groan dramatically, making Theo laugh so hard he hiccuped. She saw Jae-won's phone ring and watched him ignore it because Minjun was explaining, in serious detail, why the red block had to go on top. She saw the most feared man in Seoul on the floor of a kitchen, laughing quietly like laughter was something he had forgotten he could do. And she felt something in her chest shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a door that had been locked for years cracking open 1 inch. Sometimes, when Jae-won stood to leave, Theo would run after him and grab his sleeve. "Come tomorrow," Theo would say, as if he was assigning a task. Jae-won would look down at him and answer, "Always, I will." Minjun didn't demand anything. But one morning, after Jae-won helped him tie his shoes with clumsy fingers and used to small knots, Minjun glanced up and said, very quietly, "You're tall." Jae-won blinked, then nodded solemnly. "Yes." Minjun considered him. "Mommy is tired." Jae-won's throat tightened. "I know." Minjun stared at him like he was measuring whether the man could be trusted with what came next. Then he said, "Don't make her tired more." It wasn't a child's request. It was a warning. Jae-won held his gaze and nodded once. "I won't." Amara watched from the doorway, her arms folded, her heart a mess of old love and old fear and new uncertainty. She didn't step forward, but she didn't step back either. That night, after the restaurant closed and the twins were bathed and fed, Amara tucked them into bed in the tiny apartment above the restaurant. Minjun insisted on having his stuffed animal positioned exactly right. Theo insisted on one more story, then another. Amara read until her voice went hoarse, then kissed their foreheads. As she turned off the light, Theo's small hand reached out and caught her sleeve. "Mommy," he whispered sleepily. "Jae-won come again." Amara froze at the casual way he used the name. She swallowed. "Yes," she whispered. "He'll come." Theo's eyes drifted shut as if that was all he needed. Amara stepped out of the room and closed the door softly behind her. She leaned against the wall in the dark hallway and let her eyes close for a moment. It was too much. It was too fast. It was too late. Her phone buzzed. The sound was sharp in the quiet. She frowned and checked the screen. Unknown number. A single message glowed back at her, cold as a blade. "I know who you are. I know whose children those are. And I know where you sleep." Amara's blood turned to ice. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the words, rereading them as if comprehension might change the meaning. It wasn't from Jae-won. It wasn't from his mother. Someone else knew. Someone else had been watching. Somewhere in the city below, Seoul glittered like it didn't care who lived or died inside it. Amara's breath came shallow. She looked toward the twins' door, then toward the window, as if she might see the watcher hiding in the neon. Her mind raced through possibilities like footsteps in a dark hallway. Rivals. Enemies. Someone in Jae-won's world who didn't want him softened by family. Someone who wanted leverage. Someone who wanted revenge. The message sat on her screen like a promise. Amara's hand tightened around the phone until it hurt. And for the first time in years, she felt the old instinct return with full force. Run. But when she imagined grabbing the twins, fleeing again, she saw Minjun's serious face at preschool, Theo's laughter in the kitchen, the fragile stability she had built with exhaustion and sacrifice. She saw Jae-won's hands, clumsy with Lego blocks, gentle on Theo's cheek. If she ran now, the secret would follow. If she stayed, the danger would come closer. In the quiet hallway above the restaurant, Amara made a decision without speaking it out loud. She would not disappear again. Not without a fight. Downstairs, in the city that never truly slept, forces were already moving. Because once a secret like this surfaced, it didn't just change lives. It started wars. If you want to know who sent that message and what they're willing to do to claim those twins as a weapon, make sure you subscribe to Afro-K Ruthless Love Stories. Hit like, comment your theory on who the sender is, and share this story with someone who needs a new addiction, because part 2 is coming, and it's about to get dangerous.